Maya Lewis stood near gate 27 with her flight bag resting against her leg, and she kept her shoulders squared the way she always did before a flight. The airport around her felt like a moving river of voices, rolling bags, and loud announcements, but she stayed focused on the job in front of her. She had flown for years, and she had learned that calm was a kind of power, the kind that kept a crew steady and passengers safe. Her uniform was pressed, her captain's stripes were clear, and her ID badge hung where anyone could see it. Today was meant to be simple, a short route, clear skies, a normal day that started with a checklist and ended with a safe landing. She glanced at the boarding clock and did the quick math in her head, because a captain always knew the time, the plan, and the pace of the gate. With a steady breath, she walked toward the jet bridge, ready to greet her crew and step into the cockpit to begin the pre-flight routine. As she reached the cockpit door, a man in a supervisor badge moved into her path and planted his feet as if the doorway belonged to him. He looked at her face, then at her uniform, then back at her face again, and his expression tightened into something that did not match the professional setting. He raised a hand like a stop sign and said that the cockpit was for crew only. Maya paused, letting the moment settle without giving it extra heat, because she knew how quickly small scenes could turn into bigger ones in public spaces. She answered politely and said she was crew and she was the pilot assigned to the flight. The supervisor's eyes narrowed, and he replied that the pilot was already inside, and he spoke like the matter was closed. Maya kept her voice even and said her name and title, and she asked him to check the manifest, because the schedule and crew list would confirm it in seconds. Instead of checking properly, he shook his head and said he had been doing this a long time, and he told her not to play games. A couple of passengers slowed down nearby, and Maya noticed the way attention gathered in the corner of her vision, because airports trained people to watch anything that looked like trouble. She lifted her ID card so it was easy to see, and she held it steady, not waving it, not pressing it into his space, just presenting it the way policy required. The card showed her photo, her name, the airline branding, and her captain designation. The supervisor barely glanced at it before he dismissed it and said it could be fake, as if her years of training, her background checks, and her entire career could be reduced to a quick suspicion. Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Not fear, but the cold recognition of a pattern she had met before in different rooms and different uniforms. She looked beyond him into the cockpit entrance, where the narrow hallway held the quiet hum of equipment and the smell of recycled air, and she reminded herself that the mission was still the same, which was to fly the plane safely and protect the people who trusted this airline. She told the supervisor again that she was Captain Maya Lewis and she needed access to begin pre-flight checks. He answered with a tone that tried to make her smaller, and he told her to wait somewhere else until he decided what to do. Maya did not step away like she had been pushed, because she had learned that backing down without a record often meant the same thing would happen again to someone else. She also knew that delays created pressure, and pressure made people cut corners, and cutting corners was where safety problems grew. She asked for his name and the reason for denial, because documentation mattered, and because policy required a clear reason for any action that interfered with scheduled operations. The supervisor hesitated, then spoke louder than necessary and told another staff member that a woman was trying to enter the cockpit. The word woman landed wrong, because it was used like a label meant to turn the crowd against her, and Maya could feel the shift in the air as people looked over. She kept her posture calm and let her eyes stay level, because losing control would give him exactly what he wanted. Another staff member arrived, younger, with a tablet in his hands and a worried look on his face. He checked the list more carefully, and as his eyes moved across the screen, his expression changed from confusion to certainty. He leaned closer to the supervisor and said quietly that she was listed as the captain for the flight. The supervisor's jaw clenched, and he stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. He still did not step aside, and he said they would need to double-check, as if a system confirmation was not enough when it confirmed her. Maya understood then that this was no longer about procedure, because procedure had already spoken. She felt her patience harden into something sharper, and she made a choice that was not emotional, but professional. She took out her phone and opened the airline's internal reporting channel, the one designed for operational issues, safety concerns, and compliance incidents. She wrote a short report with clear facts, including time, location, the names on badges, and the exact words used, because details were the difference between a complaint and a record. She then made one call to operations, the number she used when a situation threatened the schedule or the safety chain. She did not raise her voice, and she did not argue, and she did not create a scene, because she knew the best kind of authority was the kind that did not need drama to work. While she waited, she watched the gate clock, and she watched boarding staff glance at one another, and she watched the supervisor shift his weight as if he could feel the ground under him changing. Within minutes, a senior operations manager arrived at the gate, moving fast but controlled, with the kind of expression that said he understood the seriousness of the call. He greeted Maya by her title and name, and that simple acknowledgement changed the whole energy around them. The supervisor's eyes widened, and he tried to speak first, but the manager raised a hand and asked for the facts. Maya explained calmly that she had been denied cockpit access despite presenting valid crew identification and despite being listed on the manifest as captain. She explained that the denial was public, disruptive, and not handled through the normal verification steps. The manager's face tightened in a way that showed both concern and frustration, and he asked the supervisor why the incident had not been escalated immediately. The supervisor mumbled something about concerns and security, but the manager asked him to show the written basis for his decision, because policy required more than a feeling. The supervisor could not produce anything solid, and the silence that followed felt heavy. Maya then made a second request, and she made it in the same calm voice, because calm did not mean weak. She asked for the incident to be logged formally and for a compliance check on the aircraft and the crew handling process for that flight. The manager looked surprised for a moment, not because the request was wrong, but because it was serious, and serious requests triggered serious reviews. He nodded and said it would be done. Maya knew that a compliance check did not only look at one door and one argument, because it looked at patterns, logs, timing, and decisions. It looked at whether a crew was properly briefed, whether safety steps were followed, whether maintenance notes were handled correctly, and whether staff behavior aligned with company rules. The supervisor's face drained of color as if he suddenly realized the size of the thing he had started. Maya stood quietly as the manager spoke into his radio and called for the necessary teams, and she kept her focus on the mission, because passengers were waiting and the plane still needed a captain who would do the job the right way. She also felt something else under her calm, a certainty that this would not end with an apology at the gate. She had seen enough in her career to know that when someone tried to block a professional from doing her work, they often did it because they believed no one would challenge them. Maya had just challenged him in the only way that mattered, which was through the system, through the record, and through the rules. As the first compliance staff member approached with a clipboard and a serious expression, Maya turned her eyes toward the cockpit door again, and she knew that the next few minutes would reveal more than a single mistake. She knew that if the airline had been cutting corners behind polished smiles, those corners were about to come into the light. Maya stood near the cockpit entrance as the compliance team arrived, and she kept her hands relaxed at her sides while her mind stayed alert. The first inspector introduced himself as Alan, a quiet man with careful eyes, and he asked Maya to walk him through exactly what happened from the moment she arrived at the gate. Maya explained the sequence slowly and clearly, because accuracy mattered more than emotion, and because she knew every word would be written down. Alan nodded as he listened, and he wrote notes without interrupting, which told Maya he understood the seriousness of the situation. Around them, the gate staff tried to act busy, but their movements were stiff, and their voices were lower than before. Boarding was paused, and passengers waited in their seats with confused looks, checking phones and glancing toward the jet bridge. Maya knew delays were frustrating, but she also knew safety came before schedules, and she trusted that truth would hold. Alan asked to see her identification again, and this time it was checked carefully, scanned properly, and matched against the manifest without hesitation. He confirmed her status as captain and thanked her for her patience, and his professional tone made it clear that the earlier denial had no basis. Another inspector arrived carrying a tablet, and she began reviewing staff logs and security notes connected to the gate. She asked the supervisor to explain his decision in his own words, and his explanation sounded weaker each time he repeated it. He spoke about caution and uncertainty, but he could not point to any rule that supported his actions. Maya watched quietly, because she knew the truth did not need help once it was in the open. The inspectors then asked for access to the aircraft records, and a maintenance lead was called to provide recent checklists and reports. What began as a single incident was now expanding into a full review, and Maya could feel the shift as the process took on weight. Alan explained that a compliance check required them to verify crew handling, documentation timing, and communication flow, and that meant looking beyond the gate and into internal systems. As the team worked, Maya stepped slightly aside, giving them space while staying close enough to answer questions. She felt a mix of responsibility and resolve, because she knew this review could affect many people, not just her. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot waited, unaware of the full situation, reviewing charts and preparing systems as best as possible without the captain present. When Alan asked if Maya wanted to proceed with pre-flight while the review continued, she shook her head calmly and said she preferred to wait until the process was complete. Her choice surprised him, but she explained that beginning operations while compliance was in question could create confusion later. Alan respected the decision and noted it in his report. As minutes passed, the inspectors found small issues that added up to a bigger picture. A delay log had been altered earlier in the week without proper explanation, and a crew briefing record was missing a required signature. These were not dramatic problems on their own, but together they suggested carelessness in following rules. Maya felt a quiet sadness, because she loved flying and she respected the systems that made it safe, and seeing those systems treated lightly hurt more than the personal insult she had faced. The supervisor grew more tense as the findings stacked up, and he avoided eye contact with the inspectors. Passengers were eventually informed that the flight would be delayed further due to operational checks, and a few sighed, but most accepted it without complaint. Maya watched them and thought about how trust worked, because passengers trusted the airline with their lives without ever seeing the work behind the scenes. She believed that trust deserved honesty and discipline, not shortcuts and assumptions. The operations manager returned to the gate and spoke quietly with Alan, and their conversation carried the tone of difficult decisions. Maya could not hear every word, but she caught phrases about policy breaches and corrective action. When Alan approached her again, his expression was serious but respectful. He told her that the review had uncovered multiple handling issues at the gate, and that the denial of access was only one part of a broader problem. He explained that continuing the flight under those conditions would not align with company standards. Maya nodded, understanding what that meant even before he said it out loud. Alan stated that the aircraft would be temporarily grounded until a full review was completed and corrective steps were taken. The word grounded carried weight, and it rippled through the gate like a sudden change in weather. The operations manager announced the decision to the staff, and the supervisor's shoulders slumped as if the reality finally settled in. Maya felt a steady calm rather than triumph, because her goal had never been to stop a flight, but to protect the integrity of the process. She thought about the young staff member who had checked the manifest correctly, and she hoped the system would support people who followed the rules, not punish them. The inspectors continued their work, collecting statements and securing records, and Maya remained available without hovering. She answered questions when asked and stayed silent when there was nothing useful to add. In that silence, she reflected on how easily things could have gone differently if she had accepted the dismissal and walked away. The flight might have gone out on time, but the underlying problems would have remained, waiting for a worse moment to surface. Maya believed leadership meant choosing the harder path when the easier one risked harm. As the gate area slowly cleared, with passengers rebooked and staff reassigned, the airport returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed beneath the surface. Maya finally entered the cockpit, not to fly, but to secure her belongings and speak with her co-pilot. She explained the situation briefly, and he listened with respect, expressing support without unnecessary words. Together they checked that systems were safely powered down, following procedure even though the flight was cancelled. When Maya stepped back into the terminal, the operations manager thanked her for her professionalism and told her the company would follow up. She accepted the thanks but reminded him that professionalism should be expected, not praised, because safety was not optional. As she walked toward the exit, Maya felt tired but grounded, like someone who had stood firm in strong wind and remained standing. She knew the review would continue beyond today, and that reports would be written, and changes would be required. She also knew that what started as a denial at a cockpit door had become a moment of accountability. Maya left the gate area with a quiet certainty that the sky she loved was safer when rules were respected, and that speaking up, even calmly, could change more than one flight. The next morning Maya arrived at the airline's operations building with her flight bag in her hand and a quiet focus in her eyes. She did not wear her uniform today because this was not a flight day and she wanted the conversation to stay about facts. The lobby was bright and cold and full of people walking fast with tablets and badges. Maya checked in at the front desk and received a visitor pass even though many staff already knew her face. She noticed how rules were followed more carefully now, like the building itself had become more alert. A woman named Sarah from compliance met her near the elevators and greeted her with a professional smile. Sarah guided Maya to a conference room where 2 managers and 1 legal advisor were already waiting. Alan was there too with a folder in front of him, and a calm expression that did not change easily. Maya sat down and placed her hands on the table and waited without rushing anyone. The lead manager introduced himself as Tom and said the airline was opening a formal review into the gate handling incident and the related process problems. He said they wanted Maya's statement in full and they also wanted her perspective on what needed to change. Maya nodded and said she would share what she saw and what she knew and nothing more. The legal advisor reminded everyone that the goal was safety and compliance and fair process for all staff. Maya listened and appreciated the careful tone because it meant the company understood the risk of treating it like a simple public relations issue. Sarah started the recording for the official notes and asked Maya to describe the incident from arrival to the grounding decision. Maya explained the timeline with clear details and steady words, and she avoided guessing about motives. She said she presented her ID and was still denied access, and she said the denial was handled loudly in front of passengers. She said proper verification steps were skipped and escalation was delayed without a valid reason. She said the situation created stress at the gate, and stress often leads to mistakes. Alan asked a few questions about exact wording and exact time marks because those details mattered. Maya answered calmly and kept her eyes on the people who were writing. Tom thanked her and said they had already collected statements from the gate staff and security. Sarah then opened a file on her laptop and showed a list of related findings from the compliance check. There were missing signatures and late entries and a pattern of staff using informal workarounds when the schedule got tight. Maya felt a quiet disappointment because she knew how easy it was for shortcuts to become habit. She said that checklists were not paperwork for decoration and they were the backbone of safe operations. The legal advisor asked Maya how the denial affected her ability to perform her duties. Maya said it delayed her pre-flight routine and it also signaled to others that procedure could be replaced by personal judgment. Sarah asked what Maya did in the moment to keep things controlled. Maya said she stayed calm and documented facts and used the internal reporting channel instead of arguing. Alan nodded as if he approved of the approach because it protected both safety and clarity. Tom then shared that the supervisor had a history of informal decisions and prior coaching notes. Maya did not react strongly because she had expected something like that. She said the company should not wait for a big incident to correct repeated small issues. Sarah asked if Maya believed passengers were treated fairly during the delay. Maya said passengers were inconvenienced but they were also protected because safety decisions were made early, not late. The meeting paused when a new person entered the room with a thick envelope and a serious face. Tom introduced him as Omar from Internal Audit. Omar said the review had expanded because an anonymous report came in overnight. Maya felt her attention sharpen because anonymous reports often meant someone was scared to speak openly. Omar said the report described pressure at certain gates to keep on-time numbers high even when process steps were incomplete. He said staff felt they would be blamed for delays even when delays were caused by staffing shortages and broken equipment. Maya listened and felt a heavy sense of recognition because pressure could bend good people into bad habits. Sarah asked Omar if the report included specific examples and dates. Omar said yes, and he placed copies on the table for the compliance team. Alan scanned the pages, and his expression tightened slightly for the first time. Tom asked Maya if she had experienced similar pressure. Maya said she had seen it in small ways like rushed briefings and quiet hints to move faster. She said true safety culture allowed people to slow down without fear when steps required time. The legal advisor agreed and said policy supported that principle. Sarah asked Maya what she wanted as an outcome from this review. Maya paused and chose her words carefully. She said she wanted fair accountability and real training, and a clear message that procedure mattered more than pride. She said she also wanted the company to address how staff assumptions could harm both people and operations. The room became quiet for a moment because everyone understood what that last line meant. Tom said the airline would conduct mandatory retraining for gate supervisors and update verification steps for crew access. He said they would also review staffing levels and equipment readiness at the affected gates. Maya nodded but said training only worked if leaders supported it consistently. Alan added that compliance would increase random checks for a period of time. Omar said internal audit would examine performance metrics to ensure they did not reward unsafe speed. Sarah thanked Maya again and asked one final question about her decision to request a compliance check. Maya said she requested it because the denial was not just disrespectful but also a signal that rules were being treated casually. She said when one rule is ignored it becomes easier to ignore others. Tom ended the meeting with a promise of follow-up and he asked Maya to remain available if additional questions came up. Maya left the room and walked down a hallway lined with framed photos of planes and smiling crews. She looked at the photos and thought about how much trust those images represented. She did not want the airline to look good only in pictures, and she wanted it to be good in practice. As she reached the elevator, she saw the young staff member from the gate standing near a water station. His name tag read Nina, and his hands were shaking slightly as he filled a cup. Maya approached him calmly and asked if he was all right. Nina looked surprised and then nodded quickly and said he was fine. Maya could tell he was not fine and she did not push him. She simply said she noticed he checked the manifest correctly and that mattered. Nina swallowed and said he was worried he would be blamed for what happened. Maya told him that telling the truth and following procedure was the safest position in the long run. Nina nodded again and his shoulders lowered a little. Maya told him to write down what he remembered while it was still fresh. Nina said he already did and he planned to submit it even if it made him unpopular. Maya said that courage did not always look loud and sometimes it looked like a quiet person choosing the right step. Nina gave a small thankful smile and walked away. Maya stepped into the elevator and felt the day settle on her like a weight. She was tired, but she also felt a clear sense of direction. She knew the review would take time and some people would resist change. She also knew that silence would have been easier, but it would have left the same problems waiting for another moment. When she walked outside the building, the winter air felt sharp and clean. Maya took a steady breath and looked up at the sky beyond the airport roads. She loved that sky and she wanted every person who flew under it to be protected by rules that were respected. She turned toward her car and decided that if this review created real change, then the hard day at Gate 27 would become something bigger than a delay. She drove away knowing Part 4 would be the hardest part because it would show whether the airline truly meant what it said. 2 weeks after the incident at Gate 27, the airline called Maya back to the operations building, and this time the invitation felt different because it came with a full agenda and a list of people who would be present. Maya arrived early and sat in the same conference room as before, and she noticed new posters on the wall about safety culture and respectful verification steps. Sarah entered with a folder and greeted her with a calm smile, and Alan followed carrying a thicker report than last time. Tom arrived next with Omar and 2 regional directors who managed multiple airports, and their serious expressions told Maya the review had reached the highest level they could not ignore. Tom began by thanking Maya for her professionalism, and then he said the airline had completed the first phase of the investigation and they were ready to share findings and actions. Sarah slid a copy of the report across the table and Maya read the summary slowly while the room stayed quiet. The report stated that the supervisor denied cockpit access without proper verification and that he escalated the situation publicly instead of following the respectful private steps required. The report also stated that gate performance pressure and loose record habits had created a risky pattern where small shortcuts became normal. Alan explained that compliance had compared logs across several weeks and found repeated late entries and missing confirmations at the same gate team, and he said the issue was not one person alone but a chain of habits and leadership tolerance. Omar added that internal audit reviewed performance targets and discovered that certain managers praised speed numbers more loudly than they praised clean process, and he said that kind of praise shaped behavior even if no one ordered shortcuts directly. Maya listened without interrupting because she wanted the focus to stay on solutions rather than emotion. Tom then described the actions already taken, and he spoke clearly as if he wanted no confusion. He said the supervisor was removed from duty pending final HR steps, and he said the gate team would go through retraining and mentoring led by compliance staff. He said a new crew access protocol would begin immediately, including a mandatory scan of crew ID and a second verification step if any doubt remained, and he said any denial would require instant escalation to operations with written reasons. Sarah added that the airline created a new rule that any public confrontation with crew would be treated as a serious conduct issue, and she said the goal was to protect both safety and dignity. Tom said the airline would also adjust staffing at busy gates so that supervisors were not forced to cover multiple roles at once, and he said broken scanners and outdated tablets would be replaced within a month. Maya nodded and said equipment and staffing mattered because people under pressure made weaker choices. Alan then asked Maya what she thought about the planned changes and whether anything important was missing. Maya took a breath and said the new steps were good, but they would only work if leaders enforced them every day, even when schedules were tight. She said training once was not enough because culture was built by what happened on the hardest days. One director asked Maya what culture looked like in practice, and Maya answered in simple terms. She said culture meant a young worker could pause boarding to fix a step without fear of being punished for a delay. She said culture meant managers asked why a step took time instead of blaming the person who followed the step. She said culture meant assumptions were replaced by verification and respect. The director nodded and wrote notes. Tom then shared a plan to start random audits at gates and to publish results internally so teams could learn from one another. Omar said they would also change evaluation metrics so managers were rewarded for clean compliance and stable operations, not only fast departures. Sarah added that the airline would create a confidential reporting path for staff who felt pressured to rush. Maya appreciated that because the anonymous report had clearly mattered. The meeting shifted when Tom said they wanted Maya to help lead a new internal session for supervisors about captain authority and proper verification. Maya was surprised because she was not a corporate trainer, but she understood the value of hearing from someone who had lived the problem. She agreed on one condition, and she said the session must focus on process, not personal stories. Tom agreed and said the message would be that procedure protects everyone, including the company. After the meeting ended, Sarah asked Maya to stay for a short follow-up in a smaller room. Inside, Nina was waiting with a nervous posture and a notepad in his hands. Maya recognized him immediately, and she saw relief in his eyes when he realized she remembered him too. Sarah said Nina had submitted a detailed statement and it helped confirm timeline details, and she said the airline wanted to make sure he felt supported. Nina admitted he had been worried, and he said some co-workers treated him coldly after the incident. Maya listened, and then she told Nina he did the right thing and that safety often depended on people who were willing to be honest even when it felt uncomfortable. Tom entered briefly and said the airline would not tolerate retaliation, and he said Nina would be moved to a different team with a mentor supervisor who had strong compliance ratings. Nina exhaled like he had been holding his breath for days. Maya told him quietly that his future in aviation would be built on choices like this, and she said he should keep choosing the correct step. Nina nodded and thanked her, and then he left with Sarah. Maya walked out of the building into bright winter sunlight, and she felt the strange quiet that comes after a storm. She knew the airline was taking action now, but she also knew real change would be tested later when the memory faded. A week after that, Maya returned to the airport for her first flight since Gate 27, and she arrived earlier than usual to observe the new process with her own eyes. At the crew entrance, a staff member greeted her politely and asked for her ID, and the worker scanned it and confirmed her assignment without hesitation. The interaction took seconds and it felt normal, which was exactly how it should be. Maya reached the cockpit door and no one blocked her path, and she stepped inside and placed her bag down with a steady calm. The co-pilot smiled and said it was good to see her back, and Maya answered that it was good to be back in the sky. She began her pre-flight routine with careful hands and clear focus, checking systems the way she always did. Outside the cockpit she heard the gate staff speaking in controlled voices, and she noticed the rhythm was less frantic and more organized. When boarding began, a supervisor walked the aisle with a tablet and checked steps carefully, and Maya saw the small change that mattered most, which was people doing the right thing even though it took an extra moment. During taxi, Maya looked at the runway lines ahead, and she felt the familiar sense of responsibility settle into place. The plane lifted smoothly into the air and the city shrank below, and Maya watched the horizon with steady eyes. She did not think of the gate incident as a victory because her goal was never to win. She thought of it as a lesson that rules must be defended quietly and consistently. Later, after landing safely, Maya stood at the open cockpit door and thanked passengers as they exited, and several nodded with tired smiles like they were glad to be home. When the last passenger left, Maya closed the cockpit door and sat for a moment in the quiet. She thought about how many people relied on systems they never saw. She thought about Nina and the anonymous report and the managers who finally listened. She thought about the simple truth that respect and safety were connected. Maya stood up, gathered her bag, and walked out with calm steps. She knew there would always be challenges in any large system, but she also knew one clear report could push the system back toward what it was meant to be. As she reached the terminal window, she looked at the planes outside and felt a steady confidence return. She had not grounded an airline by force. She had grounded a problem by bringing it into the light.